Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And thanks so much, Katie, for the introduction. Covered a few things that I'm alluding to. And also, of course, thanks to Pastor Rich. I know he's not logging in here, but he's the one that has the trust in the Spirit to open it up to a lot of people from other traditions. And this is something that I think we mutually value. So it's a privilege for me to be a part of that. I come from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I saw today we sometimes commemorate people. Some of you might call saints, although as a Lutheran, I call them saint sinners. I mean, that's how our understanding of human character is. No one's completely perfect, which being a saint implies. But today we honor I just saw this briefly from an Episcopal friend. It is a not Swedenborg, but a Swedish Archbishop, Soderberg, I think it was, the first religious person to receive a Nobel Prize, and important in the World Council of Churches, which really has all its emphasis towards recognize the value that are brought from all different traditions and trying to come together under that commonality and do it. So I will say a little bit more because Rich is so good to have me. I like to, say this slavishly to the clock that he says. So don't start the timer yet on this. This is all pre-sermon right now. But I'm not going to talk a lot about the hymn that I requested, a poem written by Catherine Lee Bates with many verses that change. There's a new, and I haven't watched it yet because it's quite new, documentary. It's a short one, I know. I just looked it up and I wish I could tell you. But if you look up new documentary on Catherine Lee Bates and writing America the Beautiful, you will find at least an interview of the producer of that. And that's where I got some of these tidbits and doing a little extra research on that because we're rightfully cautious about national hymns going too far in raising up things that are in conflict then with our confessions or our understanding of God and one and only God. So this is some have the gifts of prophecy. That's what Malcolm read before, Dr. Peck read before he cut out. Some have the gifts of prophecy, which is not so much predicting the future as truth speaking. And in poems, we could kind of find ways to do that. So people sing America the Beautiful, assuming it's just a rah, rah, go America. But there, as you can notice, even at first blush, some of the ways that critique is brought and challenge to acknowledging a beautiful country, God's beautiful country, and some goodness in that tradition, but also God mend thine every flaw is an obvious one. But like Thine Alabaster City's Gleam, she was traveling to Colorado College, where Pikes Peak inspired her in some ways for that poem. And in Chicago, she stopped at what we usually call the World's Fair there in 1893. The Alabaster City is that name of why they called Chicago back then the White City. It wasn't true marble, but it was a facade at least that was still beautifully painted white. And then electrification was new, so it was gleaming bright. And she acknowledged Thine Alabaster City's gleam. And then in the phrase undimmed by human tears, she really is referring to just several blocks away the abject poverty that was there. And you could argue she really meant we might be wise to be dimmed a little bit by tears as we continue to mend the flaws and make this nation as much as it can be. So I just offer that to you as I get going now. And again, thanks for joining today. We'll have some time for questions later in conversation as I understand it. So in the Navy, we have something called a challenge coin, not just the Navy, but the other branches. It's a very old tradition, and it's really something one does to honor others. And there may be, it's the Navy after all, some connection with who pays the bar bill or something like that. But as a chaplain, I've never used mine in that particular context, at least not yet. But what I chose to do in my coin, my command coin, and I also can tell you no tax dollars except my own were spent on this. So this is completely on the up and up. I can give these to anyone I want to, and I could design it in a way that I wanted to. The way that I wanted to design it was to show the four faith traditions that are represented in the reserve component of the Navy Chaplain Corps. And that's the group of about 230 chaplains in conjunction with upwards of 1,000 on active duty that I've been able to be a part of leading for the past nearly 3 years, getting close to the end of this job and the end of my career, this particular calling as a chaplain in the reserves. But the community that I've served has about 230 chaplains, and the staff corps devices that I have on here represent those four major faith groups of individuals that have sensed some kind of call to combine their service of God and country in this particular manner. So I have the stone tablets and the Star of David. That's what our rabbis wear as their staff corps device. We have in the reserve component, we have one Buddhist chaplain, so he wears the Dharma chakra. Some call it like the prayer wheel. It actually, interestingly, looks like a ship's wheel. But the other branches of the service as well, Air Force and Army, if they have a Buddhist chaplain, they would wear that same staff corps insignia. We have the crescent for the imam that we have. And of course, we have a cross, which I also have on here, which represents the many and varied kinds of Christians that serve as chaplains for the sake of, and that's another reason that I have it, they serve in the chaplain corps as guardians of the religious rights, the free exercise, and as caring for everyone as the best we can without bias and openness to all, regardless of their faith or no faith, that serve in it. So this is one of the ways that I have shown the value to exercise this leadership on behalf of the Navy, at least the Marine sailors and Coast Guardians that we serve. So we could always debate the validity of a call to an institution like the Armed Forces, but most would recognize that uniformed service is one particular kind of patriotic commitment. So are there other ways to define patriotism? John F. Kennedy famously said, "Ask not what you can do for your country or what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Was he referring only to himself as a Navy reservist and 5 other presidents since World War II indeed served in the Navy? Was he suggesting this was the only way that we can do things for our country? Do we as citizens of the U.S. get to exercise that citizenship and do so out of core theological values, our religion, for the sake of the common good? Does one's commitment to something greater than self, for a monotheist like me, does this get to be founded in, and in this land, is it permitted to flower from our faith? Again, so as I said, my coin is meant to be a symbol of the Constitution we support and defend. And yes, I've either sworn an oath to that, or at least I've affirmed that that Constitution, which includes the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment religious clauses, which I mentioned, to exercise any faith we want or no faith at all. And also the absence of any one official state, church, or national church. No state religion in this country, although many of those who came over the years, whether voluntarily or not, came from traditions that had a kind of a theocracy where there was a state church. One of the daring things I would say the founders did is right away in that First Amendment to determine that we're going to try this differently. And that's going to hopefully allow, and we could argue that it has, I mean, there are American original religions that have thrived in this context of religious freedom and practice. So chaplaincy is one of the ways that I've exercised my faith as a citizen. In the reserve component, of course, I'm a citizen sailor. So most of the time over the years, it's been 10% a sailor and 90% a civilian or a citizen who serves in other ways, oftentimes for me as a pastor of a church. There are times where I've done that full-time service, like when I was in Iraq and when I recruited chaplains of all faiths. That was 5 years of active duty full-time and a few other occasions, but mostly I was this citizen sailor, the distant descendants of those who really were pre-citizens who fought the war of American insurgency, as one of my professors at the Naval War College in Newport said, or what we usually call the American Revolutionary War. In talking about my own faith tradition, that's one particular theological lens, often very different from many others, even within this same majority Christian religion in the United States. So whether transplanted from Germany, as my ancestors were in their faith, or whether it was sown or grown here, as in those American originals, can we say something about the way that all of us as people of faith or none are free to exercise our citizenship in the USA? And do you exercise your faith seeking to fulfill the founder's vision in this great American experiment? How is our exercise of citizenship founded in and permitted to flower from faith? Pastor Rich sent out a link for a PBS documentary. I don't know if you haven't got a chance to see it. That one's a full hour long, but if not, I really encourage you to go look at it. This is a pretty recent one, I think maybe 2020. But as we know, and as we can imagine, tensions have always existed in this effort to enact and enforce the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. It's easy to defend those who are like us, and even challenges start with those who are of the same broadest faith traditions, the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. At least in our day, it seems like non-Muslims like myself are probably misrepresent or caricature Islam any more than any other world religion. So if that's true and that's an injustice to the way most people practice that faith, is what MLK Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. How has this country grown in justice to protect and defend, as I have, against all enemies, foreign and domestic? The 1A free religious exercise, beyond that of, say, our own, the middle-aged one of the three Abrahamic faiths in Christianity. As I said, I'm a certain kind of Lutheran, a religious professional wearing the cloth of my tradition, similar to what your pastor, Pastor Rich, wears, who also has for 36 years worn the cloth of the nation in order to protect the freedoms of any and of no religious tradition or practice, while with, again, as little judgment or bias as humanly possible, care for everyone, provide that confidential communication that chaplains provide, and advise commanders along the way, including on how they are enacting those religious clauses of that First Amendment. Whether anyone here on the Zoom in this room has served, particularly in the military, how might we define patriotism? At this point, early in the 251st year of the country, how's our exercise of citizenship founded in and permitted to flower in our faith or out of our faith? So I'm Lutheran. From Luther's view of the church and of the state comes from something he called the two kingdoms point of view. On the left, he said, this is nice because it's kind of his ideal one, so he's not biased against left-handedness, but on the left, he'd say there's God's kingdom or a heavenly kingdom, a heavenly realm, and it's a covenant that is affected solely by God's grace and claim and call on us. I sometimes call this realm the kingdom of God, minus the G, because in our understanding of everyone, and this is borrowing from our Jewish tradition, our ancestry, the very first creation account in Genesis says that all humankind is created in the very image of God. So if we have that treasured view of who all people are, then this is the ideal that's held up in the way that God sees it. Now, Luther, on the other hand, on the right hand, said there's the kingdom of this earth. He said and insisted that this must be governed by the rule of law in order to maintain security and allow humankind to thrive. Again, without sidetracking too much in the hymn, in the poem that Catherine Lee Bates writes, she says, confirm thy soul with self-control, thy liberty with law. That's writing likely in response to something that happened there in the late 1800s, the Spanish-American War, and some grabs that she would say in that poem, in the kind of nice, secret, backhanded way that poetry does, that we must not be an imperial state. We who were colonists ourselves were wrong to, just because we could, to seize other lands. Confirm thy soul with some self-control and thy liberty with law. So that's what Luther insisted was how we have to have the world so that humankind can thrive. He was also, with church and state, kind of a precursor to what Jefferson talked about in a nation that separated the two, church and state. But I actually have doubts that whether Luther would have been happy or enthused to allow Muslims and Jews to freely, happily practice their religion. God mend thine every flaw applies to us in most of our religious traditions too. Imperfect people honoring and holding up and receiving what other imperfect, but oftentimes very visionary leaders have done requires all of us to acknowledge those things, such as my church has done in some of the things that Luther said or that were perverted to do some of the things that had to do with anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and even the Holocaust, since he was in Germany several centuries before that happened. So how about our biblical tradition? In an exchange that Jesus had with some religious leaders, they were probably trying to find a smoking gun to accuse him of insurrection to the empire, so that would make their getting rid of him a lot easier. Though it wasn't obvious in this, I'll get to what could have been some of the kind of subtle messages, if you will, the poetry, the stories that had something that kind of catches you and reflect on it. But we read through this, I won't quote it all. The people came to me, they said, teacher, is it right to pay taxes or not? If he said no, then they knew they had him. I think the scripture says that they were, hypocrites. They're hypocrites, and perhaps they were more people that were a little treacherous as well. But he said to them, why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius, bring me a coin, so that I might see it. And they brought him one, and he said, okay, whose head is on this and whose title? Or in older translations, whose image is on that coin? And they said, well, it's Caesar's. And so Jesus said to them, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So what did the emperor really own? What was Caesar's? Everything the eye could see? Everything that they had power over? Or was what Luther said almost like a slightly more contemporary Lutheran in Johann Sebastian Bach, who said on every musical score had the postscript Soli Deo Gloria, or SDG, to God alone the glory. So was it possible that when Jesus said give to Caesar what's his, but we all know nothing is, it's all God's, and give to God the things that were God's? He may have had that in mind, and in that sense we would call it a pretty radical prophetic word that's challenging the expectation that they didn't exactly get him on that one. But he raises up instead, in our tradition in celebrating the Eucharist, the communion, we raise a chalice. In ancient Rome, they had a tradition where they would raise a chalice and say to the emperor, and then they would have these symposia, these conversations or debates, and many of them were quite open and encouraging and supportive and creative and visionary, but they lifted up the cup to Caesar first. And so you could see where Jesus, in an underhanded way too, as we carry on this tradition today, behold the cup of blessing that we bless, we may say, in holding up this cup. Our allegiance, our homage is not to the emperor, it is to Jesus Christ. So how is it that we serve in a country that, especially in ours, which perhaps to our credit, or maybe you disagree with it, has said we do not have one single religion. This country, as I said to my friend this afternoon, is not Baptist or Buddhist. It's not Lutheran or Latter-day Saint. Amen. Instead, in 1A, we have the non-establishment part of that. So we are also, though, have the free exercise. How do we exercise that faith? Well, in the letter that Paul wrote, he said, here's what you don't do. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so for us, how will we bring that transformation to others? We are not a subcultural group like back in the Midwest. We have Amish who have decided to stay, and they have that right to exercise their faith specifically and generally stay out of public policies and politics in a lot of ways. There are ultra-conservative groups, more like around the area that I'm sitting in right now in DC, of various religious groups who in some ways do something more subculturally too alongside of it. Others of us would say to one point or another, we need to be countercultural. That's what Paul is saying. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world. So maybe we need a little look at this kingdom on the left that Luther talked about, which is to say a kingdom where all are kin, all are related, and all indeed should be allowed to thrive. So how is this exercising of our citizenship founded in and permitted to flower from faith? We get some clues about how this can happen. I've been watching The Little Shortcut because I have plenty of books I like. There's a Netflix documentary out on the American experience. I've only watched the first episode because I just heard it was coming out. Former vice president notes something about freedom. How do we exercise our freedom? She talks about this country which was freeing from and free to. The rebellion was to be free from monarchy, to be free from taxation, of course, without representation. And there's kind of a strong anti-tax sentiment that remains. And free to do things like assemble and speak freely and to worship. To worship was the freedom, specifically why in 1790, George Washington went on a tour supporting the freedoms that just might unite a new nation or give us that potential for it to happen. Out of this flows what is an essential tour, basically, when you are in Newport, Rhode Island, which is where our chaplain school is. So when we were there, I did indeed take the tour to something called the Touro Synagogue, one of the oldest synagogues in the United States, famous especially regarding the First Amendment. So the Jews there were concerned that they would be oppressed, that they wouldn't be allowed their free exercise. Washington writes to them in this letter, talking about this new government, and says, "For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens. And here the word demean meant to prove yourself as a good citizen. In giving it on all occasions their effectual support. So all anyone needs to be is a good citizen. And to do those things which most of us could argue, and you could see in some of those documents, is for the sake of the common good, with strict protections of minority viewpoints, be it of religions or whatever other non-majoritarian aspect that people represent. There are many ways, which is why in my introduction I included what my children are doing. None of them probably in the military, though my youngest daughter, the nurse, has the best chance to be a Navy nurse. I keep reminding her. But clearly these three, though they practice their faith differently than I do, are representing something that serves the common good, being nursing for healthcare, being our eldest in caring for creation and stewardship of God's earth, be it our middle child who's an ASL translator, bringing that insight and that possibility of communication, something that's part of being created in the image of God, being able to communicate in the unique way that human beings can. And my wife as well has served as a child counselor at Naval Station Everett to give young children, often can be invisible, often can be considered non-majoritarian, though and probably these days there are with old people like me around that are numbering out the country. But there again, a chance to bring vitality and life-giving ways. These are ways that they practice their faith, and these are ways I believe that we're exercising our citizenship. So my one brother, Katie didn't mention, I have a brother who is also a retired chaplain, and he has on his license plate something that says 3 chaps, CHAPS, which is the short name, especially in the Navy, that they call a chaplain. Hey, chaps. He has 3 chaps for himself, for my father, and for me. This is the way that 3 Muschinskes have exercised their faith in the public forum. Just one way. There are so many more that we do that. And so as I finally bring it to a close, I say thank you for your service. And after I have a sip of water, I look forward to some conversations that we can have. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Amen. Yeah. Maybe we can start with any questions online or a general.
All right, Jimmy. I'll give him the mic. Good. Yes. You need a mic?
Yes, we have a special mic.
So they can give me.
Oh, sure. All right.
You can stay. I can stay here. Excellent.
Yeah.
Chaps, thank you for that beautiful sermon. I have a question about the coin. I noticed you mentioned all the different faiths, and I'm assuming you said Christianity, but Catholicism, is that listed on the Christianity? I noticed you did. I noticed you didn't mention that, but is that separate from Christianity? They seem to think that they are, and maybe I'm misunderstanding.
No, and I would say since that was our roots in the West, that the roots of Christianity in the West, of course, including my own, come through Catholicism, and in the East, the sometimes forgotten Eastern or Orthodox traditions come into it. So yeah, but that's a very good question. So in case, well, you heard him. So with a cross on there, it's got a pretty broad range, and it's open to certain debate about, well, should they be in it, or should this other group be in it? I get that. That's a very collect-all category, and these are not meant to be real specific. When an individual sailor fills out we call it a religious needs assessment when they join a command or a Marine, they get to identify exactly what their religious tradition is, so that in the best way, all of us being very specific, if you get one chaplain for 750 or 1,000 sailors and Marines, not many are going to be specifically your variety of Christianity. You have the responsibility to ensure that to the maximum extent possible, and this is how it began, and Congress authorized a chaplain corps, and how we still justify paying federal salaries for religious people, in many cases different from ours, is that if they're in an extremist situation, shouldn't these sailors, Marines, Coast Guardians have every right to practice their faith to the fullest extent? And so chaplains get to be part of the safeguard that does that. And then if you're a tradition other than your own, many of them have a rich tradition of lay people can do things, so you're responsible for seeing that they're trained, because there's just not enough priests to go around. There's a lot of Catholics. So you're going to find other ways to supplement that and provide it. Yeah, but to answer your question, yes. So Catholicism, Latter-day Saints, just trying to think of an American original, of course, Swedenborgian, those would all come under the cross, as they should. But so there is a huge variety of religious experience just within these, within Within Judaism, there's not nearly that many different schools. There's four. One of them are an American original as well, Reconstructionism Judaism, which one of our rabbis, he's retired now, a friend of mine, was of that tradition that was formed here. But you have Reform Jews, you have Orthodox and Conservative. Islam, you have at least a couple main categories, and so that would all be represented by the crescent. And Buddhism, definitely have some varieties of traditions there, but you would have that same staff core device so people would know, oh, you're a chaplain. Oh, you're also a Buddhist.
Orthodox Jews, it would be still under Judaism.
Yes.
Because all these faiths that you mentioned are broken up into different categories in terms of what I believe. I'm a Jew, but then I could be an Orthodox. I'm a Christian, but I can be an Orthodox Christian. In the Ethiopian world, you're a Christian, but then they have Orthodox, their birth, their holiday, everything falls under.
Yes.
So as a chappie,
Mhm.
you have a lot of things to remember. And I'm not a chaplain, and I remember all those things, but you have to literally remember all those different religions under that coin.
Okay, so you couldn't get all that maybe on there, but a chaplain is not going to be an expert in all the others, but needs enough knowledge to be able to facilitate. In fact, that's what we have are basically one of the prime responsibilities. There are four core competencies. One of those is to facilitate the religious exercise of those who are not like you, which is going to be the vast majority of those in any kind of unit that you're assigned to. They're going to be different. Your responsibility is to facilitate whatever religious experience and exercise they want to have to the maximum extent. There are different ways to do that. Lay people is one. Clearly, if you're in a shore installation sort of command, you have many of those opportunities right outside the gates where members can go and practice their faith and the rites, rituals, worships, different kinds of things. But that's your responsibility to empower that. The other one is, yes, you do provide for your own. But again, even if you're a Roman Catholic priest, it's still not going to be the majority of the group in that battalion of Marines. It's going to be a bigger group than my kind of Lutheran, for instance, or some other ones. It's going to be larger than the number of LDS that want to have a lay leader and practice there, probably. But it's not going to be anywhere near the majority of the unit that you have. So that's a responsibility. Provide for your own, facilitate for everyone else's, care for everyone, as I mentioned, and regardless, and to the best we can to be completely open, because the military it's a serious protection of confidentiality that anyone has with a chaplain. I mean, it goes well beyond some good protections that we would have in the private sector and civilian ministry, where there's confidential sorts of confessional statements, but there's still some places where you have mandatory reporting. In the Uniform Code of Military Justice, this is the person, the chaplain, not when I'm wearing this uniform, but the person who provides that 100% confidential communication, regardless of what you're coming to the chaplain for. And then the fourth one is to advise the command. And that relates to everything you're saying, to advise the command that that one Lutheran is not every Lutheran, that one Jew is not just like everyone. And there may be some variances there and in the practicing of that the chaplain does need to have enough knowledge so they can advise the commander to do the best that she or he can do in providing for those members of the military that are under their command. Dr. Beck. Can't hear you yet. Hold on. Is there something that we've done here? Oh, you're probably on mute. You may be on mute.
Okay. I suppose one could say that maybe by force of circumstance, you are in effect embracing ecumenism in the military. It's sort of a nice teaching opportunity, I would think.
Yeah, I would say you are embracing both ecumenism. I might go even further to call interfaith, maybe slightly broader than that. Sometimes you use ecumenism, but absolutely recognizing that fullness of variety. It's one of the times when it works well, that it is a beautiful and amazing thing that I wouldn't get as a pastor of a specific Lutheran church in my 90% job when I've been pastor of a church. So yes, it is, and I'm glad you can see that, and I think a lot of Americans can see that can be a beautiful thing. And then occasionally, as you know, whether it's integration, even though we've had our history of not doing so well, there's some real advances that happen in this melting pot that comes in, reflecting the population in the military. And of course, where federal law then supports that, you sometimes get some real steps forward in various kinds of things. Kelly is coming forward.
Thank you, Reverend Peter. I had a question. I was hoping you could talk about how moral injury shows up in your work. In my ministry, I provide spiritual care to congressional staffers, and I'm doing a lot of thinking in working with staffers on like what does it mean to like be carrying out actions for your boss that you don't totally align with and values. So I'm curious about how this shows up in service members that you provide support to and how you respond.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kelly. So you all heard the question. It's a good question, and we have some who have, I'm getting towards the end. My flock has got smaller and smaller as you get more senior in rank. There are still senior people like other admirals that come to me for confidential conversations and potentially for moral injury things. Number one, I like what you're saying is so it's not limited to issues that happen in combat or with military members. Because certainly that is one of the places when I was in a combat zone where you get various things that happen that might be the values you held hadn't maybe reflected on. Now you're asked to do things, or I've seen people killed and start to challenge those we call soul wounds or moral injury because of what they've done to a person. So, I won't get into details, and I'm not I'm a trauma aware person, and my wife helps with that because that's one of the things she does regarding children in her child therapy. And chaplains are not often trained as therapists, which I don't have a different degree in that, but this is our subject matter here, soul wounds and moral injury when it comes to how one's faith, especially if they've been brought up in a faith tradition, has been injured, has been afflicted by something, that long-held belief that has now been violated by something that they've done. I don't have a lot of good answer on that. I do know some people that are definitely subject matter experts in advising us. One is a chaplain friend of mine that has done things in international moral injury sorts of things, but he also is helping to make the segue, just like I do when it comes to everything. The military is unique in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of other professions, not all violent ones where things happen, but anytime you've held up certain values of what maybe you think a country should be doing, where their priorities should be, and now you're in a situation where your bosses are taking in a different perspective. Sounds like that's some of what you used to say. Okay, probably first honoring that and saying you're not diminishing that or minimizing that as if, well, get it together. Have you ever seen anyone killed in front of you? Get serious, which of course responders and police officers and law enforcement and military would have that certain thing that is an injury, or a nurse in an ER. There's just things, or my daughter's working in labor and delivery and children not surviving and things. We would say with a soul, in the broadest sense, being spirit people, to notice things that disrupt that and are not life-giving, of course, is causing that kind of harm. So yeah, you can follow up if you want. I think there's an awareness, a growing awareness, because this isn't, Edmund Tick's work, I think, was primary back in Achilles in Vietnam, in what happened with Vietnam veterans. Some of that moral injury, not only what you've done in combat or seen done or been asked to do, but then being received or not received well when you come back home and you thought, hey, I thought this was honorable work. It's not the only one. We can debate about the military's, a great profession, but you don't take this out on me. I mean, I was ordered to go into this. I was drafted in that case and forced to go forward. And now you're kind of blaming me for political decisions that all of us have ownership in, to a point, don't we? Isn't that, we're talking about the First Amendment. We're talking about this novel concept of a democracy where, we the people are involved in it. So I'm going far afield there. If you want to follow up on that, or after it's all done and we turn this all off, I can talk to you a little more on that. So next time, everyone, if you want to have that, you got to get into the place, because your speaker is going to be right here and have after effects over a nice beverage of our choice. So.
Thank you.
Peter, thank you so much for your message and for your service. I feel really moved by your whole biography, the work that you do, the work that your family does, almost on the verge of tears. I feel really inspired by everything that you do. So I work with kids as a teacher, and I'm just wondering, if you were speaking to a group of kids, for example, and the question came up, what are the top 3 qualities that make a good citizen? What would you say? Or top 5, I don't know. Not to put you on the spot.
Well, I doubt I'm going to come up with 5, because top qualities of a citizen, presumably of this country, and there are other good countries that have constitutional governments that tend to be representative. So I also don't mean to say there's there's a potential for exceptionalism, which we sometimes have seen, but we have no monopoly on that. So top qualities of a citizen, I say one is, engage in some way. So people say, well, are your children doing this? And I said, my children are voting, tax-paying citizens. That's something that, I mean, at a minimum, they're paying for many of the things that vary in different times in the country, whether it reflects, more or less of what they want. But I'll call that a minimal way to exercise that. I'll also say perhaps you're exercising your citizenship by refusing to do that and by being that prophetic voice who's insisting that there needs to be a little more dramatic action. That's possible. I'm not advocating that for any of you or anyone that gets a hold of this recording. I'm saying there are different ways that we can exercise. So one I will say, do it. That's not even one. One, it's a democracy, so voting absolutely is. I'm committed to that, and I think on whatever level that is, and that includes from your local school boards on up to federal elections that we have. I like.
I lost
You did you say you lost me or
your pod case. It did this wonderful tumbling act.
oh you're not muted there.
Are you done with them?
Trying to look. Okay. Oh, it's here on our end. Okay. So participating, voting. I would think for me, I like to see an integrity so that people are, I think they're consistent in how they are in their smaller units, maybe a household, a family, however that's defined, and they're consistently carrying some of these same advocacies, if you will, or priorities. I would say for me, and this is a Christian bias, if you're not doing some things, or plenty of them that do not advantage you, but advantage people that that need to be brought up and be given a fair chance to thrive, I would say that's a quality of a good citizen, is being aware of, so that's a self-awareness of an informed and seriously reflecting upon others that have not had kind of the opportunity to thrive, even though if they are citizens, they're going to have an opportunity to participate at least in some level of that. I got sort of one or two or three there. But thank you for your service. Absolutely. Thank you for your service with children. Very, very crucial and one of the ways to do it both. Is that the Reverend here? Has he been here working the whole time?
Yeah, Pastor, I'm here with my family at the beach, and we're very grateful for you doing this. My quick question for you is, can you explain the logic between the paring down of the chaplaincies and knocking out so many different religions, including Swedenborgian, which we did have chaplains in the past?
I kind of explain the logic of that. You said quick question. Don't you love it when someone says quick? I love it when they say quick question. I said, here's a quick question. It's going to have a super complicated answer, but it's a quick question. And it is a quick question that you gave. Yeah, I have thought about this before, and maybe that's why I'm, just pausing for a second here. Yeah, I'll take my time. Thank you. I mean, the logic is how many, I suppose this is an analogy, I'm just thinking here, how many different faith traditions do I have here? The logic is there must be some advantages to simplifying that. And the counter argument is one crescent is not all of Islam. One cross is not all of Christianity. Now, you brought up the ones that have been removed. The argument, I guess, against that or to consider the other thing is to say this is a country that honors non-majoritarian views and religions. And so what are we gaining? So I guess that's what you're asking by limiting those. For the Navy, I can give this answer. On the religious needs assessment, that issue, which I'm keenly sensitive to the potential harms from it, is one for the time being that is not affecting the Navy as much because we have these individual that I mentioned religious needs assessment, which give full agency to the individual sailor, Marine, or Coast Guardian to say exactly what their religious group is. And is it recognized in the same way by the federal government? Not necessarily. Is it recognized by the chaplain? That's the part of the command religious program, ordered by the commander to provide for the needs? Yes, that person is. So clearly, if this was an issue of are you eliminating endorsing agents, which it's not at this point, to us, I would say that becomes a bigger issue because now how does one of those non-majoritarian religions become a chaplain if they don't have an endorser? You can't be. Everyone that's a chaplain has an endorsement, and you served in that capacity, Rich. I know. Everyone has an endorsing agent and an endorsement. Otherwise, you can't be a chaplain. So there could be problems if that kind of action is taken to limit the leadership, especially. Yeah, I'm the logic of reducing that number for the federally recognized numbers of religions amongst all of our armed forces. Um, I'm sorry, I haven't seen that spelled out, so I can't confirm or deny some of the reasons why and that's sometimes the way it goes. Some of these things are pretty easy to brief from senior people and pretty hard to integrate or see exactly what the implications are or what the benefits are when we can see some of the costs of those.
Thank you.
Questions in the room? I did see that Katerina put something in the chat.
Oh, right in the chat.
Let's see.
By the way, Rich, I didn't, while she's looking for that, just going to take a second. When I was in Iraq, and I told my friend this today, I'm not sure it was an apparition or a real person that happened to me, but I was there. We had CBs that were killed in accident, engineers and builders, you saw that. And it was a hard time, obviously, for a lot of the things that all of us did in the unit, including for the person responsible for coordinating memorial services and things. That was me. So a senior boss, not my faith tradition, realized this chaplain might need a little support, sent someone up, not my faith tradition. I am quite confident his last name was Johnson and he was Swedenborgian. It was my first encounter. And at the time, I wasn't really that focused on that. We had other pressing things in that combat zone. But that's who was sent and was a wonderful, amazing support for me there, though I've never seen or heard from again. And even the amazing power of AI has not provided a search of who that might have been. And that would have been 2006. Rich. So maybe sometime this is our homework assignment, is see if we can get to the bottom of that person that was there for me as an asset and a support.
Hey,
when the chaplain corps works at its best, those happen amongst very, broadly diverse groups of religions with different worldviews.
We'll find him.
All right. And maybe I got the name wrong. Yeah. Okay. What's the, yes, tell me what that, yeah, read it out loud, please.
Thank you. And for anyone who's wondering, I am aware of the time, but I think that I think it's been very worth our time. So if anyone needs to hop off, we understand, but thank you. So Katerina put in the chat, what a lovely talk, Peter. Unfortunately, I'm on the road and can't unmute. Question 1, have you seen that kind of religious pluralism as you've observed in the Navy/armed forces institutionalized anywhere else in the U.S. culture? And question 2, if we have time, what was the most memorable experience for you personally serving as a chaplain? She also wrote, I'm personally so inspired by the service your entire family demonstrated to this country and the underserved. Thank you, and may God bless you for that.
I appreciate all those blessings. So I can talk fast, which is one thing I'm good at, but I'm trying to think if I get the question. So the first one is, how is this done outside of a chaplaincy? It's done by organizations like Swedenborgians are part of the National Council of Churches. And what I just did a little research briefly on the way in today, and I mentioned the Archbishop of Uppsala, who was a key in starting the World Council of Churches. You have to have apparently a certain critical mass for that, according to my research. And so Swedenborgians would be a part of that vast international group. Now churches, so they're truly ecumenical and not necessarily interfaith, but many of these same churches like mine that are in that are involved in dialogues that happen with different religions. I think you've done that here in this place. So you've seen it worked on smaller scales. I am not sure, obviously, academic institutions that are fostering this, that are looking to bring people even of different diverse viewpoints together. I've seen that happening. I was a part of one of the oldest interfaith breakfast dialogue groups when I lived in St. Louis. Once a month we met at Hindu, Islam, rabbis, Buddhist ministers, Christian pastors that came together to first of all discuss things, but also to be activists when things were happening in their communities where they could unite over some common ground and some common good. I would say being in Iraq certainly was what I thought might have been my only legacy, or primary legacy, which is serving just in those kinds of existential moments, those thin places that I think the Celts have said, and when you're there and the place between God and eternity and existence are so thin, to be a caregiver in those environments and to do things that is an understanding of my faith group, which is God's acting and agency in the world in an incarnate religion like mine, to be present and actually even quiet, but alongside of people going through suffering is a critical part of my memory and legacy. I'll leave it at that. There's been other things since then. I was surprised to stay in longer and have some other opportunities. So thank you for that blessing again, Katerina. I wish I could see you in person. I guess I never have, but you helped me the first time I came on, and I feel like I know you, and it's a blessing to be a part of this. So I will say thank you to everyone again as we get going on our way.